This is the Windy City Nitty Gritty Podcast. I'm your host, Walter Hefner, and I hope you all enjoyed your holidays as well as enjoying the start to this brand new year. So, on this episode, I want to talk about a wrestling documentary series that I came across back in April of 2019 called The Dark Side of the Ring. This wrestling documentary premiered on Vice TV, which was known as Viceland. Now, this documentary covers, basically it covered various wrestlers, or basically it covered various events that happened in wrestling. So, with these 6 episodes for this first season, they talked about the killing of Bruiser Brody in one episode. Another episode talked about the life and death of Gino Hernandez. Now, Gino Hernandez was a wrestler from World Class Championship Wrestling. He was part of a tag team known as the Dynamic Duo, which consisted of the late gentleman Chris Adams. And Chris Adams, as some may know, was the trainer of WWE Hall of Famer Stone Cold Steve Austin. Another episode dealt with the Fabulous Moolah. As for the other 3 episodes, there was one that talked about the Macho Man, Randy Savage, and Miss Elizabeth, as well as an episode that talked about the Von Erich family, and they spoke with Kevin Von Erich, the last surviving brother of the Von Erich brothers from World Class Championship Wrestling, as well as the 6th episode dealt with Survivor Series 97, known mostly to all of us wrestling fans as the Montreal Screwjob. Now, regarding that Montreal Screwjob episode of The Dark Side of the Ring, I would recommend, before watching Dark Side of the Ring's story about it, I would recommend watching a documentary called Hitman Hart, Wrestling with Shadows. This was a wrestling documentary that was released in 1998, and it followed Bret Hart in his last year with WWE before he went to WCW. Now, the thing about this documentary, these cameras followed him all around, especially that night of the Montreal Screwjob at Survivor Series 97. Now, you want to talk about cameras that were in the middle of everything? These cameras were in the middle of everything. I'm talking about the cameras were right there, before the match, during the match, and even right after the match especially. They were in the middle of all the heat, the whole aftermath, everything that took place after the Montreal Screwjob. So I would highly recommend watching Hitman Hart, Wrestling with Shadows, just to see everything that went on after that match. And then I would follow that up with watching the Dark Side of the Ring episode about the Montreal Screwjob. You'll be glad that you did, trust me. Now, regarding that series, I come to bring you all good news. Now, come to find out that this series has been renewed for a second season, and it will be consisting of 10 episodes. Now, a couple of the episodes mentioned, one will touch on the life and death of Dino Bravo. Now, Dino Bravo was a WWE wrestler from the 80s until about the early 90s, so some may remember his matches against the likes of the Ultimate Warrior, Hulk Hogan. You also may remember him from various matches such as WrestleMania 5 taking on Rugged Ronnie Garvin, as well as WrestleMania 6 taking on Hacksaw Jim Duggan. There will also be an episode about the WWE Brawl for All. Not sure why they're doing an episode about the Brawl for All. It was such a debacle and it's totally forgettable. I wouldn't even waste my energy or time even doing an episode about something that was nothing, basically. But that's just me. However, the episode that I want to talk about that I'm really looking forward to for the second season has to do with an episode about Chris Benoit. A lot of us may remember him as the Rabbit Wolverine or the Canadian Crippler, but they're doing an episode regarding the double murder and suicide by Chris Benoit that took place back in 2007. As we all know, Chris Benoit unfortunately took his own life in 2007 by hanging himself. But prior to that, he also murdered his wife, Nancy Benoit, as well as his youngest son named Daniel. It was an unfortunate tragedy, and, you know, we lost a great person as well as, we lost two other people and great people in the process. And, in spite of that situation, I believe a lot of people are just looking at, Chris Benoit and remembering him for the wrestler he is and not, how he left this earth. Now, regarding his wife, Nancy, now, she was also in the professional wrestling business for a good while as well. A lot of people may or may not know this, but she was the ex-wife of WCW wrestler and booker Kevin Sullivan. And now I remember her from her time being the manager of the tag team Doom, Butch Reed and Ron Simmons, back in the late 80s, as well as she was the manager for the Four Horsemen. At the time, that Horseman faction consisted of Nature Boy Ric Flair, Sid Vicious, Barry Windham, Arn and Ole Anderson. And then later on, when the Horsemen reunited, she was part of that as well with Ric Flair, Arn Anderson, Chris Benoit, as well as when Steve Mongo McMichael was part of the Horsemen as well. And, when we think about Chris Benoit, you can't do nothing more than just think about the type of matches that he left behind, the body of work that he left in the ring for us to remember him for, and it was just sad how WWE decided to not make any mention of him, after finding out what really happened to him back in 2007. Here it is, WWE makes the decision to remove nearly all mention of Benoit from their website, their future broadcasts, and other publications. Now, the only other mention WWE made of Chris Benoit was in a WWE encyclopedia that was released back in 2008. But other than that, there has really been no other mentions made of Chris Benoit. So, I'd said this on a previous episode. It's like, how can they try and omit everything that he's done? How can they try and, shut him out of wrestling history books when he's already made his mark on wrestling? He's already made his impact. He's already left a body work for everyone to remember. How can we judge anybody? How can we be judgmental, try and, erase somebody from people's memories that's made a lasting impression on top of us? Now, to give you some other information about Chris Benoit, he is from Edmonton, Alberta, Canada. He trained at the Hart Family Dungeon. And some of the notable graduates of the Hart Family Dungeon, beside the Hart brothers, of course, include AEW champion Chris Jericho, as well as Lance Storm, and the late Flying Brian Pillman. Now, I had the opportunity myself to meet Chris Benoit back when I worked at O'Hare Airport in Chicago back in 1999. And this was about a couple months after Owen Hart's passing, actually. And, he and Bret Hart had just finished their match in WCW that they had dedicated to Owen Hart's memory. So had a chance to meet him at the airport. He was such a humble and down-to-earth person, had a chance to shake hands with him and get his autograph. This was before everybody started taking selfies, but it was just great to meet him. But you never would have thought that, someone would end their life and do what he did. But as I said, it's not about, remembering how he left here, we don't want to be like how WWE did, and we don't want to hold on to how he ended his life. You don't want to remember Chris Benoit for how he left this world, but let's remember him for what he left us in this world, what he left us in the ring, his body of work, how he went out there every day and every night to put on a great performance, how he put a smile on fans' faces, young and old. And, let's just remember him for the good things that he did in the ring, and, let's just remember him for the performances that he put on in the ring, whether, you go back to his early career and look at some of his matches back in IWGP as the Pegasus Kid or Wild Pegasus when he wrestled the likes of Jushin Thunder Liger, or Black Cat, otherwise known as Eddie Guerrero, Black Tiger, Eddie Guerrero, as well as, the various matches he had throughout his time in WCW, his bouts against the likes of Tuco Scorpio, Chris Jericho, you know, Jeff Jarrett, just to name a couple of people that he faced during the various times that he appeared in WCW, or even his WWE matches against the likes of The Rock, Kurt Angle, Chris Jericho, just name a couple of opponents that he had. And one thing I can say about Benoit's matches, you never saw a bad Benoit match, no matter the opponent, Benoit got the best out of that opponent, as well as Benoit made that match memorable in some way, shape, form, or fashion. He made that match one to remember and one for you to talk about. So again, let's remember him for the body of work that he left in the ring. Let's remember him for the great matches that he performed and put on. Now, regarding that episode for season 2 with Dark Side of the Ring about Chris Benoit, now some of the people that have been confirmed to talk on this episode happen to be Chris Jericho, who happens to consider Chris Benoit one of his best friends in wrestling. We'll also be hearing from Chavo Guerrero Jr., who happens to be the nephew of the late Eddie Guerrero, as Eddie Guerrero and Chris Benoit were also good friends in this business. And, even when you think about the relationship between Eddie Guerrero and Chris Benoit, after Chris Benoit won the World Heavyweight Championship at WrestleMania 20, how him and Eddie Guerrero had embraced in a ring together, and just how it seemed like at that point how their careers had came full circle, how they started at the bottom and then at that point worked their way up to the top being champions in the business at that point. And a lot of people were just saying how tight him and Eddie Guerrero were and how Benoit wasn't the same after Eddie Guerrero's passing. So again, we'll be hearing from Chavo Guerrero Jr., as well as we'll be hearing from the sister of Nancy Benoit, Chris Benoit's late wife, as well as we'll be hearing from Chris Benoit's father, as well as his eldest son in this documentary. Now, I'm looking for other wrestlers or other managers or, commentators to have remarks, because with season 1, you heard from the likes of Eric Bischoff, Jim Cornette, Vince Russo, Mick Foley, Dutch Mantell, as well as Bruce Pritchard. Now, hearing from Bruce Pritchard, we may or may not hear from him, because at the time when Bruce Pritchard did season 1, he was not with the WWE at the time. But given that he is with WWE at this point in time, there is that 50-50 chance that we may hear from him or we may not hear from him. But again, I'm looking forward to this Chris Benoit documentary in season 2 of the Dark Side of the Ring. And again, I highly recommend that everyone check out season 1. Those of you that are wrestling fans will appreciate this series, as well as look forward to season 2. And again, that's all I have to talk about on this episode on today. Again, I hope everyone enjoys the new year. And again, don't forget to follow us on Twitter, as well as don't forget to like and subscribe to our YouTube channel. God bless you guys. Take care and enjoy the new year.